Good afternoon. The approach we will follow is a little bit different of the other papers. We will not measure the impact of the economic crisis on national elections, because in Belgium it's quite difficult since 2007 to study this kind of thing, because we have not only the economic crisis but also a very institutional crisis about the future of the federal state of Belgium. That's the first remark. The second remark is, in fact, crisis is in fact a change which is defined as a crisis. So now the focus is on economic crisis. In the past we have got a lot of other crises: 9/11, Maastricht Treaty, government austerity measure, and all those kind of things. So what we want to do, in fact, in this paper is to make a more profound and broader perspective on this situation. And what we wanted to do is, in fact, to show, in fact, how the social economic cleavage is transformed during the last 30 years, and what are the consequences, in fact, on the political right in Flanders. And we wanted to illustrate it, in fact, not based on cultural attitudes, but we want to show it based on welfare state opinions in relation to voting behavior. So we want to take a broader perspective, and the perspective is in fact that we are not living in an era of crisis, but we are living in a crisis of an era. So it means, in fact, that what's happening during the last 30, 40 years is, in fact, a crisis of the bounded structuring of organized modernity. And organized modernity was based on clear boundaries, national boundaries, but also boundaries based on gender, class, religion. And so what we can see now during the last 30 years is a restructuring and declosure of the cultural compromise, the social contract, and the political cleavages of organized modernity. First of all, what you can see is a deep bounding of the external boundaries. So by processes like globalization and European integration. On the other hand, you have also a destructuring of the internal boundaries based on class and religion. So, and this was in fact a result of processes like individualization, migration. At this moment, you have also the economic crisis, of course, and combined with the other processes, what you have, in fact, is a crisis of the tripartite between labor, capital, and government. So the relations between them are changed quite profoundly. So what we, in literature about, so it's cleavage politics, if we have cleavage theory, what we want to show at this moment. In literature, the focus is mostly on the rearticulation of the transformation of cultural conflict. So the whole issue about the new integration, demarcation, cleavage, where in fact authoritarian nativism is opposed to libertarian cosmopolitanism. At the same time, this new integration demarcation cleavage has also consequences on economics, on individual, but mostly on collective welfare. And so what you can see is at this moment, so the crisis of organized modernity, organized capitalism, has also effects on the conflicts about social redistribution and economic policies. So you can see a lot of effects of European integration, growing cultural heterogeneity, and welfare retrenchment on issues like social redistribution, issues like equality, reciprocity, contribution, and things like that. So what we want to do is, in fact, to show how this socio-economic cleavage is transformed. And if we refer to this left-right divide, it refers still to the state versus market conflict. So it has still to do with social equality, the issue of egalitarianism. And on the other hand, it has still to do with the state versus market conflict do we need government intervention, yes or no, or is the free market? So the whole issue of individual versus collective responsibility. Besides what you can see, it's not only that conflict. The whole socio-economic conflict in organized modernity was in fact specified by the welfare state itself. It was specified by the national and social growth state. So the pie was always growing, and there was still a community of national citizens. But you can see by processes like globalization, individualization, migration, even also the economic crisis, what you could see is that, that conflict is becoming more complex because the welfare state itself is becoming the topic of debate. It's for sure for Western Europe. So, and the whole discussion now is in fact the size and functioning of the welfare state. So, do we need welfare state in the way it is at this moment? It's all the discussion about efficiency, effectivity, good spending, and those kind of things. What you can see is a lot of welfare state criticism. On the other hand, what you could see is that a lot of new inclusion-exclusion conflicts are clear. So it's about the limits of solidarity itself. So do we need a universal or a particularistic way of solidarity? And here what you can see is that at the moment that this conflict is becoming clear, all the taken for granted criteria of deservingness in the past are becoming topic of debate. And so the whole question at this moment is now which groups could get what, why, and under which conditions. And so what you can see is the different criteria of deservingness are in public debate. Is it identity? Or is collective welfare restricted to our own people? So then you could say it's welfare chauvinism. Has it to be restricted to the productive people or the productive contributors? So that's the whole issue about reciprocity. Then also the whole question about the selectivity of welfare. And last but not least, also the moralization of solidarity. So that only moral and responsible citizens could have part of the collective welfare. Besides, it's also becoming quite difficult to measure because different boundaries, cultural and economic boundaries, are blurring. So there is redistributional conflicts are in fact intervening with cultural conflicts, especially when the criterion of deservingness of identity is coming into the picture. What's now interesting is, in fact, if you take a look to Flemish party system, is that there are different parties at the right. And now I will be a little bit rude in my description, but at the one hand, you have the radical right, Vlaams Belang. So it's an ethno-populist party. It's combining a nativist and anti-establishment discourse. And it results, in fact, in welfare populism. So welfare chauvinism is combined with strong welfare state critique. Then since, the beginning of the 2000s, we have also a nationalist, a renewed nationalist party, we could call it, New Flemish Alliance. And in fact, it's based on a discourse of producerism, a discourse of productivity, responsibility, and merit. And what you could see is, in fact, what they are saying is welfare benefits has to be restricted, reserved to the productive population who has contributed to collective welfare. It's always framed also in a nationalist way, in the sense that the productive population are, in fact, the Flemish population. So what you see is, in fact, that you have a welfare producerism, which is based on a conditional and contributional reciprocity. And last but not least, you have also a liberal party, which has, in fact, a position of neoliberalism, less state, more market, and in fact which is defending a welfare liberalism. Now, when we take a look to our data, the research question now is which kind of groups could be distinguished in population in regard to these socioeconomic attitudes? And how could these subgroups, could they be related to structural positions and voting behavior? So based on the Belgian election study for the Flemish part, we have tried to make such kind of typology. And in fact, what we are doing, we are using 12 items. 3 items which are referring to egalitarianism. So they are, in fact, evaluating if whether income or class difference should be reduced, yes or no. Secondly, we have 3 items which are referring to neoliberalism. It has to do with the state versus market conflict. Do we need government intervention, yes or no? Less regulation for entrepreneurs in regard to striking and this kind of, and firing and things like that, and a more flexible labor market. Then we have 3 items referring to, that social welfare has to be reserved to our own people or to people who has contributed to this collective welfare. And then we have also welfare state criticism, which is in fact referring to, it's in fact a criticism to the functioning of the welfare state, not the principles of welfare state itself. So it's too expensive, makes people lazy and irresponsible, and it's inefficient. What you could do, so first of all, we did a conformative factor analysis, SAM approach, but I will not present this kind of results. What we want to do is, in fact, a more person-centered approach, so a latent class analysis. What we want to do is take a look to, is it possible to distinguish different subgroups in the population based on these attitudes? And so, what kind of subgroups could be distinguished? In fact, we can distinguish in the population 4 classes. And this is, in fact, the result of this latent class analysis. It's, in fact, a typology of socioeconomic subgroups in regard to these socioeconomic attitudes. And so what you can see is, in fact, the conditional class probabilities plotted. So what it means, in fact, that you have the, so you have the green line. It means, in fact, that in that class, almost 85% is answering, is agreeing with that we need more equality in society. And based on this results, you could, in fact, describe your subgroups in population. And what you could see, in fact, is that in population, most people are in favor of more equality. Income equality, class equality. And you see it that 3 classes are not distinguished by these equality items. There is only one. It's this class, class 3, and it's, in fact, the neoliberals. So what you could see in this figure is, in fact, that if you take a look to class 1, we call them welfare chauvinists. In fact, they are asking for more egalitarian society, but they are also asking more neoliberal measures. They are very chauvinist. They want, in fact, collective welfare reserved for their own people and people who have contributed to it. And they are very critical. They are very critical to the welfare state, the functioning of the welfare state. So we call them welfare chauvinists. Then, what's interesting, in fact, is that class 2 and 3, the conservative particularists and the neoliberals, are almost the same on most items. They're, in fact, in favor of egalitarianism. They are not neoliberal, and they have not that much critique on the welfare state. The difference is, in fact, the issue of conditional or contributionary solidarity. So what you can see is the red line, is you can see that those are, in fact, conservative particularists. They are, in fact, defending the status quo of the welfare state, but they want to be more conditional towards newcomers, towards people who want, in fact, the products of the collective welfare. And then you have the neoliberals. They are non-egalitarian. They are neoliberal in their thinking, relatively conditional and critical to the welfare state. The fourth class is, in fact, the progressive universalists, which is, in fact, defending universal solidarity. What's now, if you take a look to, what you can see now is, in fact, that you have a social stratification of these worldviews, social economic worldviews. So what you can see is that welfare populists are overrepresented in the case of low-educated people, are overrepresented by in the class of skilled and unskilled workers. And so you can see also that the progressive universalists are overrepresented by the high positions. What's maybe more interesting for us is now how it's related to voting behavior. And this is, in fact, a result of a multinomial logistic regression, which is controlled, in fact, for all kinds of structural characteristics. But what's now interesting is, in fact, that every party, so maybe you have to take a look to this table, what you can see is, in fact, the distribution, the composition of a party electorate. And what's interesting now is that most parties has a relatively dominant subgroup, which they are representing. What you can see in this case with the Christian Democrats, it are in fact the conservative particularists which are overrepresented. In the case of the liberals are the neoliberals. In the case of social democrats and the Greens are the progressive universalists. In the case of radical right, it are the welfare populists. Almost 40% of the party electorate is in fact in those classes. So I want to go to conclusions. What could be interesting, what's interesting, or we think at least, is in fact that it makes sense to make typologies of socio-economic worldviews, so that at this moment we are not talking anymore about attitudes, but we are talking about ideologies, ideological positions. And it makes sense not only to take, to do a kind of regression analysis, where you are including all different attitudes, but it makes also sense to go to a more person-centered approach, so that you are taking into account the ideological positions instead of the separate attitudes. Secondly, what's also important, and what you could see very clearly in this results, is in fact the different meaning of egalitarianism. So what you can see is that you have a rightist version and a leftist version. And so the rightist version is very exclusionary. It's a particularistic egalitarianism. It wants, in fact, a quite exclusive solidarity. And when you take a look to this, in fact, what this version is in fact saying, we want, in fact, the egalitarianism of organized modernity. Because we were a community of nationals. We were one and indivisible, in fact. And in fact, they want to have a status quo in the sense that no newcomers may be involved in this project of the national welfare state. And then we have a leftist version, so it's more inclusionary, universal egalitarianism. So it's a universal solidarity. Third conclusion is the fact that you could see at the left and you could see at the right, especially at the right, reconfiguration based on the transformation of the culture and economic cleavage. And what you can see is that you have welfare populism, you have neoliberalism, and you have conservative particularism. Third, what's also important is now we are mostly describing party electorates in terms of, you have an effect, and then it's quite easy to say, yes, labor, working class is more voting for extreme right and this kind of things. But you could see, it's the issue of essentialism. It's, Weller in the first was, the first presenter was in fact saying it's the issue of reductionism. So, and we may not make the trick to describe a party electorate as one and indivisible. So what you could see is in fact that every party is an electoral coalition which is consisting of different ideological subgroups. And what's now, and I will finish, because I will not say a lot about NVA, but what's important for every successful political party is, in fact, that it could improve its electoral coalition. So that the party could go beyond its core electorate. And that was, in fact, the case that was the case for NVA. I will not describe why it was, but you could see it quite easily over here. This party was, in fact, attracting all different subgroups. And if you take a look to the distribution in the general population over here, and the Flemish Nationalist, it's almost a reproduction. So this party was, for other reasons, because it had a lot to do with the meta-framing of nationalism, was able to attract different ideological subgroups in regard to economic attitudes. Okay, thank you very much.